Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you joining me as always. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you are a returning listener or viewer on the YouTube channel, thank you once again for your support and thank you for taking the time out of your week to have a listen to the little podcast that I try and produce for you each week and hopefully give you some valuable information. Before we get into today's topic, as always, I've just got some favors that I need you to ask. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, make sure you are subscribed on that particular platform. And if it allows you to leave us a review, like on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, jump on there and leave us a 5-star review. By you doing that, it helps us grow and it helps us continue to get this out to more people. You can also follow us on social media, so at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. You can also jump on into a free Facebook group that I have attached there, which is designed just for dads and designed around the content that I put out with this particular podcast. Now, I usually don't do much selling on this particular podcast, but I do have a new intake of my 8-week to Unstoppable program. The program's designed for busy parents to try and help them fit a sustainable health and wellness plan into their busy schedule. It encompasses training, it encompasses a little bit of nutritional advice, it also encompasses mindset around implementing sustainable habits to move the needle in the direction of things that you want to as it pertains to your strength, athleticism, fitness, and health. So if you're struggling to do that and you would like to jump on board and jump into one of our intakes of our 8-week to Unstoppable program, there is a link to book in a time for a chat to see if the program's a good fit for you and to see if we are able to actually help you with what you want to achieve within that program. So this week I'm going to jump back to a training topic. And with the fact that we have a number of people starting on our 8-week to Unstoppable program, some of who are beginners, some of who are people who have had some form of training program in the past. Others are people who have an extensive training background. I wanted to talk about a conversation I have had over the last decade plus with a lot of people just around how you should feel after a workout. And the fact is, like soreness, the amount you are gasping for air, do not need to be indicators on how successful a workout is. And there is this old adage, there is this old mindset that the sorer I am the next day or the day after, the more successful a workout has been, or the more gassed or tired I feel after a workout. Like if I need to be on the floor, gasping for air, looking at the heavens and praying to whoever it is that I need to pray to when this workout finishes in order for it to count as a successful workout. And that, I'm here to tell you, that is categorically 100% not the case. Obviously, it all comes back to what your goals are. If you have listened to this podcast for long enough, you know when I talk about anything, it is always very context specific. And this is no different, but I will say for the most part, a lot of people get this wrong because there are only certain elements of your fitness where you need to push yourself to that absolute breaking point. And the soreness factor is really something that I see a lot of people get very, very wrong. Like it is this whole no pain, no gain, like soreness is your friend. It is weakness leaving your body. It is that old adage which is stuck with a lot of people over the years where they get it wrong. Because I'm going to talk on the soreness side of things first. Soreness, if anything, can actually work away from what your overall goal is. And if we talk about a lot of people that I work with, when they are busy dads, busy mums, busy professionals who just need to build consistency, if you are sore, it will generally work in the opposite direction. And let me give you a hypothetical situation on how that works, right? You start to do a training program. You haven't trained for 12 months. And then you go and do this session and you do hundreds upon hundreds of reps of a couple of movements. And then you're at a point where maybe not the next day, but the day after, you get a bit of delayed onset muscle soreness, you need a Zimmer frame to go sit on the toilet. Like, you are that sore, it's actually affecting your day-to-day movement. Now, there are a lot of people that will tell you to potentially push through it. I am in the camp where some people can, some people can't. It really depends on the level of soreness. But the fact is, regardless of whether you're pushing through it or not, it is going to affect your ability to do the next session, both mentally and physically. Mentally, for some people, getting to the point where they're that sore can completely break them and they can fall off the wagon after the first day, because it's like, I can't afford to do this because it's affecting my work, it's affecting my ability to look after my kids, and they don't see that there's an end to it. But even if they do jump back in and they do something a few days later, what then happens is it then affects that session, like how they can apply themselves in that session, because all they are thinking about within that session is the soreness, and it will be there for the whole time that they do it. And then it may dissipate and you may get somebody who is able to continue to work through it, and then their body adapts very quickly. The other side of it is, sometimes if that soreness is extreme, it then goes on and leads to injury, because we compensate our movement patterns based around where we're extremely sore, and we start to create movement patterns, we start to do things that we wouldn't normally do, and as a result, we start to do these things that are going to put us in compromising positions, which can then lead to injury. So soreness is not necessarily your friend. Now, does that mean when you first start a training session program, especially a strength training program, you're not going to be sore? Well, this all depends, right? This depends on a few things. It depends on how long it's been since you've trained. If it has been a while, I'm talking like 6 months plus, you can expect some level of soreness. Now, a smart coach or somebody who's smart with programming should understand that you haven't trained in a while, should get an understanding of your training age. So if you haven't trained for 12 months, but before that 12 months, you were only consistent for like 3 months, then your training age isn't very high. In all fairness, you are an absolute beginner, like you haven't done that. Now, if you haven't trained for 12 months, but before that, you train consistently for a decade, that is a completely different story. So again, all of this is very context dependent. And this is why when it comes to building out a training program for somebody, I am on the bandwagon of actually individualizing the program, the volume, and what you're doing, especially in the early stages for you, because all this stuff matters in order to get you to build consistency. And if let's say you haven't trained for 12 months, you jump back in, there is going to be some level of soreness. Now, that level of soreness can be negated through a few things. It can be negated through volume. It can be negated through intensity. Now, the volume is how many reps you're essentially doing over time. So it may be something as simple as, instead of doing what, say, the rest, and this is where group programs sometimes fall over for beginners, right? If the whole group is doing, say, 5 sets of 10, but you're completely deconditioned to a point, that 5 sets of 10 may send you down that extreme soreness path. Whereas we can potentially still do the same exercises as the rest of the group, but instead of doing 5 sets of 10, we may only do 5 sets of 5, or we may do 2 sets of 10. But what we're doing is, instead of doing a total of 50 reps, we're only doing a total of 25 or 20 reps to begin with. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be soreness, because if you are moving in a different way and you are using different muscles, that is going to elicit a response from those muscles, which then may create soreness, but it's not going to create this extreme soreness. So I did an episode not that long ago about stress and giving yourself enough stress to progress, but not enough stress to break you. And this should be the approach when it comes to your training. Extreme soreness is not an indicator of success, despite what the old adage says, despite what you may have heard or you may be told by other coaches and trainers. I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely 100% not. And that extreme soreness, if anything, for the vast majority of people, will work in the opposite direction of what your goals are. Because your goal, especially in the short term, if you are somebody who is looking to get back into training or looking to implement a fitness regime, needs to be to build consistency, because consistency is where the gold is, and consistency should be the number one goal for everybody, because if you can take action on something consistently, then you will start to be able to move in the direction that you want to with a well thought out plan. And that is why, for me, and for when I deal with people, especially people who are starting to get back into some form of training, having that individualized approach has been so important, because it's allowed them in a way to progress in a way that they're comfortable with, without compromising their risk for injury and other aspects of their life. Because that is the other thing that I touched on when it comes to getting to that point with extreme soreness. You can 100% have that soreness affect every other aspect of your life. And you don't want that. If you're a parent, if you're a busy professional, if you've got a physical job, some people just can't afford to be sore for a week on end, because they will lose money out of their pocket. They will lose their ability to do things that are more important to them to train. So if anything, don't use soreness as an indicator of success. And you also, within the session, don't need to use fatigue as an indicator of success as well too. Now, this doesn't mean you don't have to train hard. Again, this is going to be very goal dependent. But if you're a beginner and you're somebody who's looking to get back into training after a while off, or maybe it's for the first time, if you are doing things under heavy fatigue, your risk of injury is going to increase tenfold. And especially for beginners, if you are doing it under fatigue, you are adding extra speed in, extra stress, extra weight to whatever it is you're doing. You are going to move in a suboptimal way, which is going to potentially lead you down the path of injury. So fatigue is also not the best indicator. And this is where, let's say you're doing a program where there is a conditioning element to it. This is where sometimes movement selection, exercise selection is so important when it comes to getting a cardiovascular response out of you within your program. Because if you're doing, say, and this is going to sound like I'm shitting on CrossFit a little bit, but if you're an absolute beginner and you're doing high rep Olympic weightlifting movements, now don't get me wrong, I love Olympic weightlifting movements. I have coached Olympic weightlifting movements for about 9 years now, so it is something that I actually quite enjoy doing in the right context. If you're a beginner and you're doing high rep, high motor recruitment movements, there is the element there where you are going to run yourself into trouble. Even something like a kettlebell swing, let's say, it may not be great exercise selection for somebody to do under fatigue, especially if they have, let's say, for example, they have trouble holding their midline under the weight that they're doing for a kettlebell swing. Maybe they're not very technically proficient with the movement because they haven't done it a lot. They haven't had a chance to practice the movement. So then going in and adding fatigue, adding a high heart rate and doing it in a conditioning situation, even though for some people it may actually be a good move and they may be able to do it because they are technically proficient at it to begin with, it may not be the best choice. But maybe doing something where there is less thinking, using an air bike, using a rower, where you can maybe do like minute on, minute off, or you can go as hard as you can for 2 minutes, then take 3 minutes rest and then repeat those efforts a couple of times. There are different ways to elicit the same response. But depending on what your goal is, adding in a very heavy conditioning element may not be the best way to do it. If you are looking to build strength and build movement proficiency, I think there is a point where you do need to do some form of cardiovascular work, but it doesn't need to be this style of workout where you're mashing 3 different movements together and doing burpees. There was a time in my coaching career where I would program burpees a lot. And especially in a group fitness environment, like an in-person group fitness environment, it's a very easy lever to pull because it is hard for a lot of people, but it's not a great movement for a lot of people. That movement itself is actually quite technically hard to do if you don't have the requisite strength and ability to do it. So doing a bunch of burpees and a bunch of other movements just to get your heart rate up may not be the best path to get you what you want, especially depending on your goal. If you're looking to build strength, be injury free, and be very efficient with your movement and increase that athleticism, doing those types of workouts and ending a session where you are that lying on your back looking at the sky completely gassed out may actually move you in a different direction to where you want to go. And again, this is all very dependent on where you're at in your training life cycle and what your particular goals are. I've done this podcast more on the preface towards people who are starting out or looking to start back out again. And this is where understanding your individual set of circumstances and whoever you're working with needs to do that in order to effectively program for you. And if you are somebody who has had a couple of false starts along the way with getting back into some form of strength training or some form of fitness regime, there's potentially these are some of the factors that maybe you need to look at if you're going to endeavor to start that journey again. And there are other logistical factors that need to be looked at, travel time, things like that. But that wasn't what this podcast was about. It was more about understanding the fact that you don't need to grind yourself into the ground in order for a workout to be successful. Do you need to push a little bit? Yes, you need to stress to progress. You can't just work in your comfort zone, because if you do, there's not going to be any form of progression at all. But that stress, that push can be done in a smart way where firstly, it moves you towards your goals in a logical, measured way. And secondly, it doesn't affect every other aspect of your life, because most people that listen to this podcast and most people I work with, we have other shit that's more important than training. We need to be able to be present physically and mentally with our families. We need to be able to be present physically and mentally for our jobs and for what we do to provide for our families. And if we're doing something that detracts from that, then what's the point? There is no point. Your training should enhance the rest of your life, not detract from it. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with that. If you've got any questions, as always, please reach out. You can find us on social media at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. If you'd like to jump on board with one of our programs, obviously I spoke about one we've got coming up at the start of this episode, so please jump on, send us a message, book in to have a chat. Link is in the show notes. But other than that, thanks once again for joining me. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Have a killer week. I'll see you next week. Bye.